Welcome to the course Knitting Design Technology Flat Knits. In this course, you will understand the design possibilities in flat knits. You will also get an overview of the basic elements of knitting, the different type of knitted fabrics, and understand the design possibilities in flat knits. This course comprises of 4 units and a final review session that invite you to reflect on what you have learned. The first unit introduces you to the machine knitting. This unit comprises of 3 modules. By the end of this unit, students will be able to differentiate woven and knitted fabrics, classify knitting and various categories, attain knowledge in flat knits in general, list various fabric structures. The first module, Introduction to Knitting. Knitting or knits, what comes to your mind? T-shirts, sweaters, socks, gloves, caps, maybe foundation garments too, right? Shirt, trousers, kurta, etc. are generally wovens. So, what is knitting and how is it different from weaving? Woven fabric is made up of interlacing of yarn. Knitted fabric is created by interlooping of yarn. Weaving requires 2 sets of yarn, namely warp and weft. For knitting, only one set of yarn is required, either weft or warp. The first classification of knits are based on whether you use weft yarn or warp yarn. If you use weft yarn, then it may be called as weft knitting, and if you use warp yarn, then it may be called as warp knitting. Stretch is the most noticeable characteristics of knitted fabric. So, how is knitted fabric different from wovens? When you hold it, probably the stretch is the most noticeable characteristics of knitted fabric. Stretch is achieved with a non-stretchable yarn. So, how does the stretch happens with a non-stretchable yarn, and why is the same yarn is used for weaving the fabric become non-stretchable? Let's look at weaving first. The yarn on both warp and weft direction are already stretched and then interlaced. In case of knitting, the same yarn is used to create loops. The loops can be stretched both horizontally and vertically till it straighten up. This gives the stretch to knit fabric. You can notice one more thing. The stretch in horizontal direction is much more than the vertical direction. As you have seen the way knitted fabrics are formed, it is easy to unravel the fabric. This instability increases once you cut the fabric. So, it is required to be made stable on the edges by overlocking or flat locking once you cut it. Now, let us understand how loops are made using one of the most popular needle type, the latch needle. Let us understand the needle first. The name latch needle comes from the latch which can be closed or opened freely. The hook pulls the yarn from the yarn feeder and create the loop. The latch will automatically open when the needle goes up, as the loop inside the hook slides down through the stem of the needle. If the needle pushed forward enough, the loop will be cleared of the latch. Now, when the needle comes down, the latch would be closed by the loop on the needle and the loop slip off from the needle. So, after when this needle goes up, it catches the new thread. Hold it. Just hold this here. Yeah, that's enough. And when this needle comes back, this loop slips over, creating a loop structure. I will show it once again. Once the needle moves up, a yarn feeder will provide yarn to the hook of the needle. At the same time, the existing loop on the needle would have moved down beyond the latch. When the needle moves down, the hook draws yarn from the feeder to create a new loop. At the same time, the existing loop will slip over the new loop and create an interlooping structure. When a row of needles moves up and then down, one after the other, a row of knitted loops created. So, it is understood that if a knitting needle moves up and down, and if there is a feeder available to feed the yarn when needle goes up, knitting may happen. The movement of needle is made possible by the movement of cam box or carriage over the needle bed. A needle bed is a metallic slab with grooves for needles to be placed facing up. The butt of the needle would be protruding out of the needle bed, while the rest of the needle would be inside the groove. By pushing the butt up or down, you can control the movement of the needle. The cam box consists of a few cams which have grooves shaped in such a way that if the cam box moves over the needle bed, the butt of the needle will enter the cam groove and the groove will guide the needle up and down. The cam box also carries a yarn feeder which will feed the yarn whenever the needle comes up, creating knitted loops. Needle movement for knitting with a diagram explaining the upward and downward movement of needles to create a nest. When the machine creates multiple rows of interlocked loops, a knitted fabric is formed. A closer look at the knitted fabric will give a clear idea about how these loops are interlocked. The row and column of loops would be very clear. The row of loops are called cores and the column of loops are called veil. So, to increase the length of a knitted fabric, the number of cores has to be increased, and to increase the width of a knitted fabric, the number of veils has to be increased. Now, let us move on to learn about the basic types of knitting. Now, we move on to learn about the basic types of knitting. As discussed earlier, either warp yarn or weft yarn can be used for knitting. The classification starts from the same difference. If warp yarns are used, then it is called warp knitting, and if weft yarns are used, it is called weft knitting. In other words, if loops are produced vertically, then it is called warp knitting, and if loops are made horizontally, then it is called weft knitting. Common warp knitted fabrics. So I think we need to cut it here. No? Laces, mesh fabrics, fine fabrics used for lingerie, thick fabrics used for outerwear are the most popular fabrics made out of warp knitting. Most commonly used knitted garments such as t-shirts and sweaters are made out of weft knitting. The most popular weft knitting machines are divided based on the shape of the needle bed. Based on the shape of the bed, the machines are classified as flat V-bed machines and circular bed machines. When the flat V-bed machines, in short flat knitting, produce mostly flat fabrics, the circular bed machines, in short circular knitting, produce tube-shaped fabrics. The flat knitting machines produce coarser fabric compared to circular knit machines which produce finer fabric. The most commonly found sweaters are knitted in flat knit machines, and the most commonly found t-shirts are made in circular knitting machines. In this course, since we are concentrating in flat knitting, it will be interesting to start with the name itself. The reason for flat V-bed knitting is because of the arrangement of two flat needle beds in inverted V position, which makes a right angle at the top of the needle bed. Let us look at these two fabrics closely. You can see the loops are bigger in one fabrics and the loops are smaller in another one. In other words, one is coarser and the other one is relatively finer. Now let us look at these two fabrics. The finer one is coarser now. The fineness and coarseness of the fabrics also related to the number of needles packed in 1 inch on one needle bed, and it is known as gauge of the machine. The number of needles available in 1 inch of the needle bed is defined as the gauge. A machine with 5 gauge would be producing a thicker fabric compared to a machine with 10 gauge. The most common machine gauges are 2.5 gauge, 4 gauge, 5 gauge, 7 gauge, 8 gauge, 10 gauge, 12 gauge, 14 gauge, 16 gauge, 18 gauge, 20 gauge, 22 gauge, 24 gauge, 25 gauge, 28 gauge, 30 gauge, etc. Today, there are machines available with 80 gauge also. Most of the flat knitting machines are below 20 gauge and most of the circular knitting machines are above 20 gauge. Though technically it is possible to produce circular knitting machines with coarser gauges like 7 or 5, it is not popular in the knitting industry for varieties of reasons. The flat knitting machine needles used in advanced knitting machines have an additional latch on the side of the needle which helps in transfer of loops. This additional latch prevents the needle manufacturers to produce gauge finer than 20. In future, there may be a way to produce finer flat knitting needles as the demand for flat knitted garments are ever increasing. Let's look at the basic stitches in knitting. There are three basic stitches in flat knitting: a full loop called knit, a half loop called tuck, and no loop called miss. To produce a knit stitch, the needle has to go all the way up so that the loop inside the needle hook was cleared of latch area and the new loop would be taken through the previous loop. To produce a tuck stitch, the needle has to go only halfway, just enough to catch the yarn from the feeder. At the same time, the loop inside the hook will slip down over the latch but not clear the latch. When the needle comes down, the previous loop will return to the hook and the hook will also have a new half loop. Since the new loop has not passed through the previous loop, it cannot be called as a full loop, hence the half loop. To produce a miss stitch, the needle should not go up at all. The needle misses the knitting and produces no loop and hence a miss stitch. To produce all these three types of loops or stitches, the cam should be set accordingly. The cam box has a groove which can be altered to get all the three basic stitches. For knit, keep all the cams in position and the groove will guide the needles all the way up to form the stitch. For tuck stitch, switch on the tuck lever and the groove will be altered and the needle will raise only halfway and come back creating tuck stitch. For miss, switch on the miss lever and this will allow the needle to pass through the cam box without pushing the needle upward, resulting a miss stitch. There is one more cam which is called a stitch cam. This cam moves up or down which will alter the length of a stitch. If the cam is set lower, the needle after receiving the yarn on hook will come down more than usual and result a larger stitch. If the stitch cam is set at a higher level, the needle will come down less than usual, forming a smaller stitch. For example, a 7 gauge machine with a smaller stitch can produce a fabric which looks like 9 gauge. And the same machine with a larger stitch can produce a fabric which may look like 5 gauge. Finally, let us learn about the various type of fabric produced in flat V-bed knitting machine. Basic fabric design, single jersey and double jersey. Let us look at the loop closely and let us imagine the back view of the same loops. You can now notice a prominent V-shape formation on one side and a horizontal streak formation on the other side. If you see a fabric with V-shaped stitches on one side and horizontal streaks on the other, you may be looking at a single jersey fabric. The single jersey is produced by engaging needles from one bed of the machine. Either front or back bed can be used for producing single jersey. The loop diagram for a single jersey can be drawn as shown here. We have to disable one needle bed to produce single jersey. This can be achieved by closing the levers in cam box. The cam setting may be represented as shown here. If you see prominent V-shape formation on both the side and it looks identical, you may be looking at a double jersey fabric. A double jersey can be illustrated as a sandwich of two single jerseys back to back. Double jersey is produced by engaging needles from both the beds simultaneously. The loop diagram for a double jersey can be drawn as shown here. Since we are engaging both needle beds in netting, there is no need to close any of the cams. The cam setting may be represented as shown here. Some of the basic fabric structures are produced by combining knit and miss stitches, and they are called Milano structures. Since the presence of miss stitch restricts the stretchability of the fabric, it is ideal for parts of garments where stiffness is required. For example, the collar of a polo shirt. There are 4 types of Milano structures, and they are half Milano, alternating half Milano, Milano rib, and rib ripple. To produce half Milano starts with a course of full needle net on both the beds followed by a single bed net complete the structure. To produce alternating half Milano, start with a course of full needle net on both the beds and a back bed net followed by another course of net on both the beds and a front bed net is repeated to complete the structure. This is like half Milano repeated 2 times with single bed being reversed from back to front in the second repeat. To produce Milano rib, start with a coarse full needle net on both the beds and a back bed net followed by another course of front bed net complete the structure. Since 3 courses complete the repeat, we have to show 2 repeat units in the cam notation. To produce rib ripple, start with a course of full needle net on both the beds and 2 courses of back bed net complete the structure. Some other fabric structures are produced by combining knit and tuck stitches, and they are called cardigan structures. Since the presence of tuck stitch double up the loop on a single needle hook, the bulkiness increases in the knitted structure and also increase its stretchability. There are 6 types of cardigan structures, and they are as follows: half cardigan, cardigan, double half cardigan, half cardigan double sided, and rippled cardigan. To produce half cardigan, start with a course of full needle net on both the beds followed by a full net on front bed and full tuck on back bed to complete the structure. To produce cardigan, start with a course of full front net and full back tuck followed by another course of full front tuck and full back net to complete the structure. As the name suggests, double half cardigan resembles half cardigan. To produce double half cardigan, start with 2 courses of front and back net is followed by 2 courses of front net and back tuck to complete the structure. As the name suggests, double cardigan resembles cardigan. To produce double cardigan, start with 2 courses of front net and back tuck followed by 2 courses of front tuck and back net to complete the structure. Half cardigan double sided is just a reverse of the second repeat of the half cardigan. To produce half cardigan double sided, start with a course of front and back net followed by a course of front net and back tuck. Now start again with a course of front and back net followed by a course of front tuck and back net. Ripple cardigan is very similar to the construction of rib ripple. To produce ripple cardigan, start with front and back net followed by 3 courses of front net and back tuck. The possibility of transferring of loops from one needle to another makes the flatbed knitting all the more preferred way of making garments these days. Shifting a loop from one needle to another on the same bed is known as move. Shifting of loops of one bed to needles of another bed is known as transfer. On hand-driven low-tech machines, transfer and move is achieved by a transfer tool. The machine operator uses this tool to pick up the stitch to be shifted and put it into the desired needle to create the pattern. A variety of designs and patterns can be achieved through the transfer and move technique. Point-tailed designs are achieved by move technique. The desired loops of a single jersey fabric is moved towards the right or left side on the same needle bed. This creates an empty needle and leaves a hole in the fabric. These holes can be arranged in such a way to create desired pattern. A drop needle design structure is usually created by switching off few needles. Before switching off the needles, the existing loops has to be shifted either with move or transfer techniques. This will create a rib pattern and a variety of designs can be achieved. To create transfer pattern, transfer few loops to the opposite bed, continue knitting for few more courses and then transfer back and continue knitting. Cable pattern is one of the most popular structure which uses the drop needle design as well as move in particular way. First, create an identifiable front net veil cluster by giving back net on either side of the cluster. This will make the cluster to stand out as shown in the image. Now divide the veil cluster into two and cross the loops as shown. Racking is achieved by relative movement of one needle bed against the other sideways. This will shift the loops of one bed in relation to the loops of the other bed. This makes the veil to deflect towards right or left. To show the real effect of racking, a rib structure with drop needle is used. The front stitch will then move towards right or left over the back net and a zigzag pattern will emerge. Veil deflection is achieved with a technique similar to the cable pattern. In cable pattern, we exchange the front net loops by crossing and placing it in each other's position. In veil deflection, we exchange a set of front loops and a set of back loops by crossing and placing it in each other's position. This will create a pattern where the veils get deflected either towards the right or left, creating a pattern. Though the flatbed knitting machine is known to make flat fabrics, it is capable of producing a tubular fabric as well by using a combination of mesh and net. While knitting odd number of courses, knit on one bed, and while knitting the even number of courses, knit on the opposite bed to create a tubular structure. This technique also allows one to produce a single jersey fabric with double the width of the needle bed. You have come to the end of this unit. To summarize, in this unit, you have been given an overview of knitting and been familiarized with fabric variations that are possible in flat knitting.